All right. Welcome, everybody, to another LinkedIn Live here, broadcasting from Administrate Intergalactic headquarters. I am really excited today to be joined by Kevin, who you can see over on, is it to my left or to my right? I'm not actually sure because this might be mirrored. Kevin is a solution engineer and architect here for us at Administrate, and you are broadcasting from your intergalactic personal headquarters in Minneapolis. So, Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself, give a little background real quick, and then we can kind of dive into what we're discussing today, which is how Administrate integrates with most LMSs and how we can get that done in just a few days, and why that's important and so forth. So, Kevin, tell us something about yourself that we don't know.
You already know I'm a big nerd, but I do love technology. And even though I would consider myself an engineer, I think where I really enjoy doing things is making an experience a lot easier, a lot less thought intensive, basically just simplifying things so that you don't have to think about them and leveraging technology at any kind of opportunity to do so. So maybe you already knew that, but it sounds a little office spacious when you say, I'm an efficiency expert. That doesn't bode well.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so your job is when a prospect becomes a customer, then there's an implementation process, and you and part of the implementation team will really work with folks and customers to figure out what is the best way to solve the problem, because we've got a pretty complex solution here. There's usually a lot of different ways we could solve a problem, but one of your big roles is to make sure that we solve it the best way.
Yeah, exactly. With something like learning, you would think that there are just some simple steps and you need to get your contacts and a few other things, but there are so many moving pieces within a training organization that you really do have to take a holistic approach to all of it. Make sure that you're taking everything into account when you're configuring, building, and setting things up. Administrate is such a flexible platform that each customer does get to enjoy kind of a customized experience. But with that, we want to make sure that we spend the time to make sure that they are using pieces of the system that bring them value in the most efficient way possible. It's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to mention today's broadcast is also sponsored by LMSIP, which I have a packet of right here in my hand. If you're an American and you've never heard of LMSIP before, it is a cold and flu remedy. I woke up this morning, you can kind of hear it still a little bit in my voice, and I was almost out for the count. But all you do, I never leave home without this. It's my travel tip maybe for today. Get a packet of LMSIP. It tastes horrible, but you put it in non-boiling hot water, you grimace, and you drink it, and then you're up and ready to go. So feeling much better as a result. I'm going to do something. When we were testing this previously, I forgot that I hadn't full screened my web browser, but I want to pull up some slides to talk about the agenda for today. So hopefully, yeah, I forgot to hit that one button. That's okay. Here's the agenda for today, folks. We're going to do our normal intro, greetings, salutations, thanking our sponsors, which we've done. Talk a little bit about why do we want to integrate learning management systems with a platform like Administrate, and then typical integration workflow. Kevin and I will walk us through that, and then when typical won't work, which happens from time to time, then Kevin's going to take control and really get into some detail around how we can solve these problems and get folks going in a matter of days. So, real quick. Just going back to the first question, why is it important to integrate Administrate with a learning management system? And for context, if you're just tuning in, Administrate is a training management system, and that means that we focus predominantly on the classroom scheduling challenge that training teams have. So our customers tend to be large multinationals. They have training events going all over the world, hundreds and sometimes tens of thousands of students, hundreds of instructors, and getting all this scheduling challenge kind of, done at scale is very difficult. Folks are using spreadsheets. It's time consuming. It's intensive. When things go wrong, it can be a real burden. And so that's our sweet spot. And learning management systems obviously are not really worried as much about physical classrooms or even virtual classrooms. They're much more concerned about that self-paced learning. And that's an important part of the learning experience, but it's not the only part of it. And so the big question is, why would we want to integrate with a learning management system? And I think the shortest, simplest answer to that, and it is simply that learners and usually the rest of the business or organization want to be able to see a comprehensive, cohesive view of what has happened, right? And so if I'm a learner and I'm an employee of a company and I go and I register for a classroom-based training, I arrive, I take my class and so forth, and then I do some LMS work or some e-learning on the side or as part of my job and getting a credential or something renewed, I want to be able to see that I've done both of those things in one spot. And it's not just me, the learner, it's my boss, it's HR, it's everybody. And so by integrating a learning management system with Administrate, you can then have the option of presenting to your learners or the rest of the organization this unified, cohesive view, right? And in terms of learning management systems, I think what is the over-under now on how many learning management system customers tend to have, Kevin? I think for a long time it was kind of around 1, and it started creeping up to maybe 2, and then we've seen some real interesting customers where I think the largest number I've seen has been 13, and they eventually got it down to 5 learning management systems. But what's the over-under these days on learning management systems at a customer?
I don't know that I see too many double digits anymore. But I would say that having 2 or 3 is pretty darn common, at least a lot more common than you would initially think.
Yeah, and that's not like necessarily a bad thing either, right? It's not necessarily somebody made a mistake or anything. Sometimes, routes that we see multiple learning management systems occurring is acquisitions, right? A company acquires another company. Another route is you have something that's very specialized. Maybe it's for a specific vertical, or just one team within the business needs that type of experience. And so this isn't bad, but again, it starts to fragment that learner experience, that administrative experience, the view that the rest of the business has, and it can get pretty ugly pretty quickly. And what we don't want to see is people having to ship around spreadsheets and flat files and all that stuff manually, because then it doesn't get done, or there are errors and all that stuff can creep in.
I see a lot more of it too when you have organizations that either have different target markets, if training is their primary deliverable, but also additionally internally, you train salespeople very differently than you train your technical staff, and so sometimes those necessitate different systems.
That's right.
But you're right. It does all come back to that: the scheduling, the pain, keeping track of every moving piece. The ability to do that within one system, report back, that's extremely powerful.
Okay. So we've discussed kind of why integration is important, and now it'd be probably interesting to pull up an example, which is, how does this normally work? How does this typically work, right? So I've pulled up a slide that we use a lot in our sales process, actually, and it could be to customers that have already come on board and they're interested in now pursuing this LMS integration, or it could just be this is a big part of the reason that they're curious if we can solve this problem. But this is a slide that we pull up and we talk about in terms of how does Administrate and an LMS integrate. Now, in this example, we've used Docebo. They're a great LMS. We've have a number of customers that are using them, and it's a good outfit to work with. But you could replace that logo with a Cornerstone, or you name it. There's 1,000 of them out there. Thought Industries, another great system that we see a lot, and the reality is that while the individual particulars might change in terms of field names and so forth, the pattern here stays remarkably similar. And that's good news for us, right? Because we're trying to make it easy to integrate to a bunch of these different systems. So we can walk you through this, but basically there's a few assumptions that we put at the top of the slide over there. And that is, Administrate is the source of truth for classroom-based training. Now, this could be virtual instructor-led training or just old-fashioned classroom stuff, or some customers now are doing a hybrid approach, right, where half the class is on Zoom and half the class is in a real classroom. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that work and that kind of instruction is the domain of Administrate. And then conversely, the LMS will be the source of truth for all e-learning or LMSs, right? If there's e-learning being done, it won't be in the Administrate platform. Now, that doesn't mean we don't support e-learning, but we don't want to muddy the waters here, and we want to have good, clean separation. We know who's responsible for what. And so from an administrative perspective, the team that is responsible for the classroom scheduling lives and breathes within Administrate, and the team that is developing e-learning content and responsible for that will live and breathe within the LMS. And then in terms of learning paths, this is kind of a customer preference in terms of where that use case goes. So some customers have learning paths already set up and they're really happy with them within their LMS. Some customers are like, look, we've got multiple LMSs and we've got classroom instruction, and we want to make sure that we can have a learning path that encompasses all of these different types of instruction. And so, depending on what your needs are, we can figure out a way through that, because Administrate does help in that case to coordinate multiple different LMSs with a learning path. But that's kind of something that's not in scope for discussion today. And really, very quickly, how this works is you will create a course within Administrate. You'll say that, hey, we need to teach something. What's your favorite course example, Kevin? We talk a lot about the burning helicopter escape course on these live events. Do you have a favorite one?
Oh man, well, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the burning. As soon as there's a fire involved, I'm in.
All right, so fair enough. So we create the course, and then that course will get pushed over to the LMS. And then once it's up and running in the LMS, and again, it kind of depends on how you want to think about things, but in this case, students get registered onto a course in Administrate, and when that happens, we fire over those registrations to the LMS. Now, most modern LMSs, we're doing this with a webhook, or which is a real-time kind of event that we fire off when this thing happens. Some learning management systems, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, will need maybe a flat file or some other type of batch-based process. That's fine too. But it's nice when we can use webhooks and have nice things. And then what happens is, if you want to make sure that the learner record is up to date in your learning management system, which we heavily recommend, the progress and results from those classroom activities get pushed over. And if I move my head out of the way slightly, if any e-learning happens within the LMS, various classes or things are completed or whatever, we want to see those pushed back into Administrate, because again, we're going for this cohesive, up-to-date record. And the same thing goes if you're using your LMS as a registration pathway for students maybe to self-serve and register onto things, then we want to see those registrations come back into Administrate. And ultimately, when basically an achievement is awarded, which is in our system in Administrate, that is kind of the credential that you are awarded when you complete a learning activity. We want to push that in most cases back to the LMS. So pretty straightforward. Did I miss anything there, Kevin?
No, I don't think so. There's a ton of details, but
yeah,
that covers
absolutely. Okay, so we'll walk through real quick here an example of a detailed workflow, and then we'll kind of back out and talk about what happens when a typical LMS integration just won't work, and some reasons behind that. So on the detail workflow, as you can see here, basically the administrator would go in and create a course template within Administrate. Now, we've talked about course templates in a previous LinkedIn Live that we did a couple of episodes ago. We'll probably do a deeper dive on that in the future as well. But what this is basically a pattern that says we need these things in order to run this class. And it could be, we need these instructors, this group of instructors are qualified. We need to have this equipment. We need to have, all of these things kind of lined up and ready to go in order to run this class. Now, traditional LMSs don't have any concept of a course template like what we're talking about, because the way that works with an LMS is you just build out your content, you upload your score files, and you hit play, and away you go. With Administrate and with classroom scheduling, every time you run a class, there are decisions to be made about who's going to teach it, where is it going to go, is there availability in these areas, and so forth. So we don't actually push a course template over to an LMS. What we do instead is we push kind of the course over, and it is kind of a placeholder for when we eventually go to schedule that classroom. And that's step 3. In Administrate terminology, a scheduled course or a class that is actively being run is called an event. But basically we go in, we schedule an event, and at that point, it will get pushed over to the LMS, usually as a session, or it depends, on the various different types of how that works. Then learners get registered, they get pushed over, progress can be recorded in either side, and then eventually the achievement will get awarded. So I've blitzed through that, and it sounds pretty straightforward, but as you mentioned, Kevin, there's a lot of detail involved. And I think what we're kind of interested in talking about today is 80%, 85, 90% of customers can use that kind of basic integration, and that can be ready to go, and that can be done in a couple hours, couple days, whatever. But there are a significant portion of customers who are like, yeah, that actually works for the 1 or 2 of our LMSs, but for the third, we've got some complications, and complications could be from a variety of different reasons and driven from a variety of different things. I'll just riff off a couple of them off the top of my head, Kevin, and you can chime in on some of the ones you've seen. But things that I see a lot are, there might be an LMS that is a legacy system, right? And it's maybe several versions behind the state of the art. It hasn't been upgraded or whatever. Or there might be some sort of homegrown thing that is out there that needs to be hooked up with. So that's kind of one complication area that we can see. Another would be perhaps there is some sort of workflow that needs to be triggered or happen when students complete things. So not only do we need to notify the LMS, but there needs to be some other system or something that needs to happen when various milestones of that integration are completed. And there's a whole bunch of reasons here. Some LMSs, they just won't support various things that have to happen, and so the standardization is a little bit weird, and sometimes the fields are not necessarily configured in a standard way. So maybe a customer's drifted off maybe the best practice configuration for an LMS. Kevin, what are some of the ones that you've seen?
Yeah, so really the first one that kind of comes to mind is a situation where a customer is having their learning system talk to their HR system to confirm that somebody is up to date with their certifications and their training requirements. And quite often, either the HR system is old and difficult to integrate with, or the LMS system doesn't provide the information in an easy to digest format. So yeah, you can run into things like that as well.
Okay. And we've got a couple of different ways that, well, maybe 2 main tools that we use in these situations. And we're going to start with the less technical one and then move into the more technical one. So one of the tools that works really well is what is, I guess, a class of systems known as an integration platform as a service, right? There's a lot of these various different systems. You may have heard of some examples of these, or maybe MuleSoft or Boomi is another common one. Workato, which is what we use, and these are great. A lot of customers will have their own platform that they can use and hook up to our API and so forth. But some customers will either not be able to access that because IT owns that. That's a pretty common thing, actually, which is the training team, unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, will not be able to actually use the integration platform that's out there. And some customers are like, that's great, but we don't want to have to deal with this. So we'll work with them to figure out a way where we can either do that work for the customer or bring in a partner to help with that work. But I think very simply, and I didn't introduce myself as an engineer at the beginning of this, but I have an engineering degree. Kevin will debate on how current or relevant that is. But this is basically programming via kind of drag and drop and workflow, right? So I think, Kevin, you're going to kind of walk us through maybe an example of how we can do this and get Administrate integrated either with a standard system in kind of a non-standard way or a non-standard system. So I think you're going to share your screen and show us the goods here. Take us on a walkthrough.
I think so.
All right, here we go. You are sharing your screen.
All right. So what we're looking at here is the Workato interface, and this particular recipe is responsible whenever a learner gets registered onto a course within Administrate. This would be responsible for pushing that out to the LMS system. In this particular example, it's Docebo. But really, one thing that's powerful about an iPaaS platform and being able to lay this out is, yes, I'm an engineer at heart, and I would prefer code. However, this makes things very easy to prototype, very easy to display, explain exactly what's going on. And one thing that's really nice is we can collaborate with our customers with their own integrations and with their own code. So here, every recipe within Workato has triggers. So how this is called to action. In this case here, we are using a custom webhook from within Administrate. So whenever a learner is registered, this particular webhook will fire. One thing that I will get into that is unique about our system, and really it's because we leverage GraphQL, is the ability to customize these payloads. So one thing that's really powerful with our interface is you don't have to go back with additional queries. If you craft things correctly, you will get everything you need to complete this transaction on your trigger.
Okay, so let me interrupt real quick because this is like one of my favorite features, Kevin, and I just want to make sure that we're kind of articulating this in ways that everybody can understand. So normally when a webhook fires, it's just an event that has happened within Administrate or in our case Administrate. We're saying that a new learner was added, right? Or a new course was created or whatever. In most systems, when a webhook gets fired, and this is very common, right? Almost every platform out there will have some notion of a webhook. But when a webhook gets fired, normally in most systems, you just get what you get, right? They have a payload, and normally it's kind of just, hi, this event happened, and it was this ID, and maybe you get a little bit more information, but that's about it. And then if I receive that message, which is just learner added ID 123, now I have to do a whole bunch of work to go out there and say, okay, now we're on my side. I've received your message. Now I need to do work, and I need to figure out things like what was the learner's name and what was the first name, last name, and maybe how old they were, and any other information that I want, and I have to go and query the API from the system from which that webhook was fired, and then maybe query a couple different places to get all the information that I need to finish the job of handling that message, right? But what you're saying is, with our webhook system, you can define exactly the payload that you want to receive when you set up that webhook, and that's super, super powerful and really convenient.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of think about it as going to the grocery store and having a list of ingredients to make a cake versus taking advantage of the curbside pickup, and basically you just tap a few things and your order is waiting for you when you pull up.
There you go.
I won't dig too deep into it, but you can see here, at least in this initial query, there is an ID field, and that's where we pull down all of the data. So all of this happens before you even receive the webhook. Everything just comes as one package ready to go. And of course, if you don't have it set up the way that you want, you can customize this at any time.
And that ID is the ID of your pre-configured webhook payload. Am I
Yes,
understanding that correct? Yeah,
exactly.
gotcha.
It's whatever object fired the webhook. So in this case, it would be the learner ID. And to kind of expand on that, one of the other really cool things about our API is that not only can you provide that data, but you can provide all associated data. So a learner is kind of an abstract thought, but essentially it is a person taking a class. And so if we have the learner, we can actually drill down to exactly what class they took, the title of the course template. We can pull up how much that particular student paid for that course, all of their training history. So there's really no limit to how many branches you can go down from that initial object. I think that's really powerful because even on top of getting all of the data that you need, you don't have to reach out to additional entities. You don't have to reach out to contacts and classes and courses, all of those other things that you need to gather that data. It's all done for you, and it's all part of the same query.
Very cool. Okay, so we've got notification that a learner has been added, or what? Yeah.
Yep. And we get a result schema back from it. Every iPass system will deal with this a little bit differently, but this is just a list of data that might come back.
And it looks like Workato has introspected what has come back into things that I can now use within their user interface. Is that what I'm seeing?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it correctly interprets everything into now I've got these building blocks from the API, and it does that all automatically. And that's pretty powerful because I don't have to do that work myself as an engineer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, one thing that's pretty cool is this particular example is just a node, just a single object that gets returned.
Mm-hmm.
But if it suits you better, anytime that there is a new person added to an account, let's just say, you could actually have it list all of the contacts underneath that account in this particular webhook. So just to kind of expand on, there really is no limit to what you can do with the data here and how you'd like to get it back.
Okay. So that's what, step one on the recipe?
Yes. And one other piece I do want to cover too is trigger conditions. Those are pretty powerful because you can prevent unwanted webhooks. So unwanted calls, unneeded extra bandwidth and activity, you can limit that by setting triggers. You can also have multiple webhooks in that same methodology.
Okay, so give me an example of that. Is that maybe I register a student onto a class, and then maybe I go back in and update that student's information real quick, and maybe I do that 4 or 5 times? Is that kind of what you're saying? And I'd get a webhook each time, but I probably don't need to respond to all of those things?
Yeah. So one thing I have seen is kind of going back to that HR example. I have seen situations where training companies, people that sell training, still do it internally, and they want to take different types of actions on internal users that complete training. So that way you can actually have a learner registered webhook for different accounts. So they have them for their internal and external.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's step one. After we've got all of our information into Workato, we do a few things in the target system. So in this example here, we do a lookup of the user by search text in Docebo. It's actually just done by email address. And then we go out and we pull the course information. One other thing I do want to point out is that Administrate is built from the bottom up to make integrations with other platforms easy. And so we store external IDs for all of the different systems that we synchronize with. So a lot of this that you see is just kind of rudimentary, but typically we would actually synchronize Administrate with the external system using external IDs. And we do that with Salesforce, Docebo. We can even synchronize with multiple different systems on the same object. So that's a pretty powerful feature. And that's also why we have to look this up. This would be assuming that the target system was in operation long before Administrate came along. So we need to be able to handle it on an ad hoc basis. Just a few other couple things here that happen. We make sure we got a user ID and an ID back, and then we check to see if they are enrolled in the course. And if they're not enrolled on the course, then we enroll them. After we are done with that, we do update a custom field in Administrate. So just as an aside on this, there are multiple places within Administrate that we can store the results of a synchronization. We do have an excellent external log utility that separates all the logs out by a job, and we can control exactly what goes into that log system from here. In this particular case, these pieces of information are being updated in custom fields, and that's another very powerful piece of our platform that probably warrants a completely different conversation.
Yeah, the architecting and the modeling of a customer's data is one of the more critical kind of challenges that Kevin and his team have to grapple with. Because for a couple of reasons. One, getting the right model to start off with is so important. If you model it correctly, everything just kind of feels easy from there. But the second reason is because most of our customers are using spreadsheets to manage training, and usually multiple spreadsheets before they come to Administrate. That means that there's kind of a data cleanup and cleansing job, and that's probably a whole entirely separate LinkedIn Live discussion that we can have. So I'm not going to sidetrack us too much, but modeling that data and making sure that we understand, these are the reasons we're doing this, and these are the other systems that we're going to connect with, and so forth, is so important. It's really great when you get it right, and not great if you don't. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say on that data sanitization topic, if you want to do that, that would be a good 24-hour LinkedIn live stream.
Okay. And the other cool thing is I haven't programmed for money in quite a long time, but what I love about this and what our customers love about this is you don't have to be a programmer to watch along and read this and understand this. In fact, it kind of looks like, some of the tools and configuration and marketing automation platforms and stuff, or, workflow things that I've seen, elsewhere. So we're programming here, but it doesn't feel like that, does it?
Yeah, exactly. And really, you do have those powerful tools under the hood if you want to use them. Workato, for example, allows you to leverage Python code as well. So if you want to inject some Python code for more complex operations, you can do that. But I do love the way that this presents from the aspect of being able to show everything in a nice flow chart. And so everybody can follow along and understand. Like you said, you don't need a programmer's mind to understand that if this is not present. It's pretty easy to understand if you just look at it.
Yeah, and we've actually walked customers and prospects whole team through this before we've hit the live button, haven't we, Kevin? And we just let's just double check, and we walk everybody through, and everybody is following along, and it's just really, really clear, and we love to see that because that helps us not make mistakes as well. By the way, we pronounce Python Python here in Scotland. Python. That's a fun fact for you there. Okay, keep going.
I think that's about it for this particular integration. It really is that simple. There aren't a whole lot of things that need to happen, and this probably looks a lot more simplistic than you would expect because there are a lot of things that are bundled underneath. So, for example, our connector that is built inside of Workato allows us a ton of freedom. And it has all of these webhook types that are built for us already. So a lot of the things that I would consider to be the heavy code is all under the hood, and that work is already done for you.
Yeah, and let's talk about that because I think it's a good point to segue into, okay, maybe I don't want to use Workato for whatever reason. Maybe there's engineers on my team. Increasingly, we see training teams, usually really high-performing training teams, have either access to or full-time engineers on the team, which is great. There could be a bunch of reasons. Maybe you want to... Look, some engineers just don't like this kind of graphical GUI programming either, right? So whatever the reason is, you may want to go and do things the kind of direct way, which we'll talk about in just a second. But in order to do that, I need a bunch of things that Workato is kind of giving me for free, if you will, which is I need to do a bunch of that setup work. I get the credentials and so forth so I can actually query the API. I need a place to run my code because that's a runtime is what Workato provides. You mentioned some of the logging stuff that you get. A lot of the, if I need to schedule something or whatever, it's got scheduling components built in. I can always break out into code if I need to. But, what are some of the other things that you get for free for Workato? But maybe why are some of the what are also some of the reasons why you'd want to code it directly, Kevin?
So I will say that one of the things that I really, really like about Workato, or the graphical aspect of it, is when you are troubleshooting, it is very easy to line up exactly where your error is occurring, because Workato will log each job or each initiation of the recipe that comes through, and it can highlight exactly where in the script you ran into a problem. It will highlight it. It will tell you what data was going in to that particular decision at that time and what data came out as an error message. Tools like that are invaluable when you are working with another development team and you need to be able to quickly and easily explain the error messages that you're seeing and that you're receiving. Quite often when I work with a development team, it's totally up in the air what language they like to work in. It may be JavaScript, it may be Python. Did I get it right?
Yes, much better. Python or Python, depending on what side of the Atlantic you're in.
There we go. So we really don't have control over their environment. And it's no fault of anybody else on the other side, but they might not be familiar with seeing what you're presenting to them. So it's nice to have that agnostic platform where it's just graphical. You just see the errors, because regardless of the language that you're working in, the error messages are going to be the same that you get back from the target system. So I love that part of it.
But you may not want to use Workato. And what are some of what we've talked about this before actually offline, which is I probably, if you put a gun to my head, which is another very American saying, by the way, if you put a gun to my head, I probably personally would just want to code it directly. And I think you've said the same as well, Kevin. So even with all this speed stuff and the graphical ability and the runtime, whatever, there are plenty of engineers that are maybe older or more old school or whatever that might want to code it themselves. What are some other reasons why you might want to do this yourself directly against our API?
Probably the top one is either that you have an old system that is not accessible from outside of your environment. So in that case, you would want to build that integration within your own, walled garden, so to speak, so that you have control over it. Or the target system is old enough where it can't ingest things via an API, and you're resorting to things like command line imports of CSV files or possibly XML.
Yeah.
Those are good cases. I've run into some other edge ones that really, they don't come up too much, but sometimes you actually have a product that has been built in-house. And so they have their own set of rules on how they're going to integrate and manage. And sometimes it's just a little too particular.
Yeah, but whatever the case, we can solve it, right? And actually, it's probably worth pointing out, you can ingest CSVs and stuff using Workato, can't you? So
Sure
that, we've seen some older, particularly older, like big enterprise LMSs, they'll want to usually run on a more of a batch kind of system, right? Which is dump a flat file, a CSV or a TSV or something somewhere, and then on a schedule, we can go in and slurp it up and process it. But let's just for whatever reason, you don't want to use Workato, you don't want to use the kind of graphical method. What are our options now, Kevin? So I think go back to screen share if that's what you want me to do.
So that kind of boils back to our API that I'll bring up here.
And what are we looking at?
API
what are we
is
looking at right
GraphQL.
here? Just for
This
context.
is our developer portal, and it looks a little busy right now because I'm logged in and I've kind of got it expanded out, and I'm looking at our API reference, and I have my GraphQL query editor up over here on my right-hand side. So one thing that is really cool about our developer page is that everything that you see that is documented about the API is live. So in other words, if we push a new feature, new description, our API expands in any way, shape, or form, this site actually represents it immediately. One thing that's really unique about GraphQL is that it offers introspection. In that you can query and say, hey, tell me about all the objects that you know about and what do they look like? What kind of values and properties are on that object? Our website, our developer website, actually uses that same interface to display our entire API and build descriptions and show linkages between everything. That's a really powerful feature, and it is what underpins the ability to come in on one object and find all of the related things underneath it. So, as I was talking about learners before, this is just an example of what a query might look like against a learner. And I apologize if the text is really small.
No, looks good. Yep.
Look good?
Yeah,
okay.
Looking good from here anyway.
So just as a way to, I'm going to go through this real quickly because I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but this is a query. I'm looking at learners, and this is my group of learners. In GraphQL, you have this concept of edges and node, but basically edges is a list of things and node is one of those things in the list. So here we're looking at a list of learners, and per each learner, I would like to get the ID. I want to get the contact record underneath that ID. And of that contact record, all I really want is their ID and their email address to verify that I've got who I want. And yes, you can filter this down by exactly who you're looking for. But one other thing that's kind of unique here is you see underneath contact, there's account, and there is an ID field and is partner field. So every contact is attached to an account. In this way, I can pull up the account details all the way from the learner call.
Yeah. So
and then additionally,
can we pause on that for 1 second, Kevin, because that's kind of a key thing. So two things actually. First is that developer portal that Kevin is showing us is live out on the internet right now. You can go to developer.getadministrate.com if you're watching this, and you can see exactly all of our documentation, the full API. And the other cool thing is the code that Kevin is showing is actually executable. So you can run those queries against a dummy instance of Administrate and get results back and so forth. So it's pretty cool. We'll show you an example of that in just a second. But the second thing is, in that example, and I'll go back to sharing your screen, Kevin, we've got learners, just walking down that query, we've got learners and we've got contacts and we've got accounts. That is information being pulled from 3 different entities at once. And in the kind of older REST paradigm, often you would find that you'd have to make 3 separate calls to get that information. And you would have to wait for each call to return to you before you can make the subsequent call, right? Because first you'd say, give me the learners. Okay, of these learners, now that I've got their IDs, give me the contacts. And for each contact, now give me the the account. And then ultimately I get the data that I want. That is time-consuming, laborious, and error-prone. And so this is a really, really nice feature. So sorry to interrupt, but those are 2 cool things. The fact that you can go and play around with this API right now on our public website, developer.getadministrate.com, and the fact that you don't have to make all these calls and chain them and so forth. You can just do it in a oneer.
Yeah, 100%. And just as a small aside, many iPaaS platforms track usage based on how many calls you make. So it can actually be financially advantageous to craft your queries in a way that you don't need to have multiples. Like you said, it's a bit of a pain to have to go back and say, okay, now I need contacts, now I need accounts, now I need events, and you've got to collate all of that data. Whereas when you see in this example, it may look a little pipe dreamish that we just have one trigger that brings everything back because it's one step. You just described 3 different steps. There's probably a couple more, and everything is done right here at the beginning of the trigger for us, just by the virtue of the API interface that we use.
Super cool. Okay, so you ran that maybe off screen. Could you show us an example of maybe running that query and getting the results back, or maybe tweaking that query? Because there's a couple of neat features. And while you're doing that, just for context as well, if you're listening in, our goal is to be an API first platform. And what I mean by that is, Kevin was kind of explaining that all the documentation is live and so forth. What we really want is to see is that whenever a function exists within Administrate, you have access to it via this API. And this API is the same API that our own engineers access to build our own platform. So it's not like there's some special, secret API or whatever. You're getting the full thing here. So realize I just asked you to live code, Kevin. Apologies, but
All good. And I'm just being picky about my formatting there. It's the whole, do you use tab or do you use 2 spaces?
A whole nother,
or is it's 4,
a whole nother live
spaces.
stream. Yeah. for a debate. Okay. So walk us through what you've done here and then maybe we can see it run or see whatever error we're going to get back.
Yeah. So all I really did was I took my event block and I expanded it out because I thought that it might be useful to see what type of instructors that we have on it. And as I was typing that, I thought about one thing I did want to show that's really cool about our code editor, and it is driven by the GraphQL introspection. If you don't know what you're looking for, you can use just a simple shift space, and you can see all of the different properties that are available under that particular object. So for this one here, I'm actually going to bring up the staff type because I want to know if they're an instructor. So I'll run this. And we get our results back, and you'll notice that the data structure very, very closely follows exactly the way our query was structured. So we see that we get data back, but then beyond that, we see learners, we see edges, we see node, we see the ID and the contact fields. All of this looks exactly like our query. So it's a predictable structure that's coming back. In the event where some of these things may not be populated, you would actually just get back a null object. So in this case here, this class, unfortunately, nobody's teaching it. This is a good example of what an empty list looks like. But if it did have instructors on it, you would actually see their contact information, their IDs, any of that information that was associated with them. But otherwise, you can see that it's a very nice, clean structure. And one thing I didn't include, but I do want to point out, is handling custom fields through GraphQL is a breeze. Typically, custom fields are one of those things that developers get a little bit anxious about because you never know what those are quite going to look like. Are they glued onto the platform? Are they really, truly part of it? I'll say that the custom field approach within Administrate is my perspective. When you have a parent-child relationship, those custom field values can actually cascade down. And I've actually also helped other customers integrate their drop-downs and selectable values within Administrate using this same iPaaS platform for communication. So when they update their parent platform with a new option and a drop-down, it comes over to Administrate and updates the custom field and gives them that new option in the drop-down.
That is super cool. That is super cool. I didn't heard that story before. I love that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. They asked, hey, we have over 1,000 records in this dropdown. Can we synchronize it? I said, yeah, I don't think you're just by hand. That sounds completely undoable. And that was pretty darn powerful. One of the other things that I really like about our custom fields is you create them once and you can apply them to any entity that you need. So if you have a unique ID field, you can apply that to accounts and contacts and events just with a checkbox. So that's great.
Very cool. Okay, so I think we're getting towards the end here, but maybe just to recap what we've gone over today. We've talked about why you'd want to integrate with an LMS, why do you want to integrate a training management system like Administrate with a learning management system, why the typical, and how the typical integration looks. So we'll walk through the shape of that and the process and so forth. And that works for, 80% of customers, 80% of the time, right? And but there are areas and customers where things won't be so typical. And so for that kind of remaining 20%, we've kind of hopefully we've shown you just how fast and easy it is to build out these integrations. Now, whether it's you building them out or a partner of ours or us working with you, that's a separate concern or whatever, but you can see the power that you have kind of baked in here to integrate, administrate with all these different systems. And then you got two ways to do that. You can do it with the graphical way, with Workato and an iPass, and maybe you can use your own iPass. I remember one customer, they were like, I think they were saying, we've got about 15 different integrations we need built. Can you help us with that? And so we said, sure. And, it'll take us, a month or two or something on the timeline. And they're like, nah, we'll just do it ourselves. And they had their own Boomi instance, and they got it done in like a week, and that was great. We were super happy about that. So you can go through the iPass route, or you can use the direct API route, and you can always mix or match these strategies as well. So use as many out of the box integrations as you want. For the ones that are really critical that need to be configured or customized a little bit, do that. And maybe you've got some legacy system that you want to be real controlled around. You can always use a direct API integration there.
I definitely lean back towards, your typical IDE more so, but I will say that there is a massive efficiency improvement when you use something like Workato to get a proof of concept, to kind of whiteboard it and take a look like, hey, where are these data pieces going to be moving? What do we need to do with them? Just storyboarding inside of a platform like that is so much easier, even if your end target is to have it as a piece of code that lives outside of an iPass platform.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, maybe Kevin and I are going to throw down the gauntlet here. If you're watching and you got your arms crossed and you've got your, grumpy old person. That's unfair to old people. You got a grumpy sweatshirt on or something, and you're like, yeah, whatever. I've got a system that, has never been successfully integrated with before or whatever. We hear this all the time, by the way. It's like integration horror stories coming in from prospects. Kevin and I are throwing down the gauntlet, and we're challenging you to bring us your integration impossibility, and we can get it integrated. In fact, we've seen this happen a number of times with customers, and they were a little skeptical, but we got it done. And Kevin's team, I didn't do anything. Kevin's team got it done, and then it's a great story, and it kind of lives on. And every day you're going to get those efficiency gains, and you're going to save time. You're going to be able to focus more on what's really important here, which is training more people in a better way. So, that's the gauntlet thrown down. Any viewers out there, any systems that you can conjure up, we can handle it, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of today's LinkedIn Live. Now, we do these every Tuesday. We've been doing them every Tuesday. We're going to keep that going, and we're really excited about the topics that we're doing. So you just check us out on LinkedIn. Send us a message. Send Kevin or I messages. Connect with us. We'd love to talk with you and answer any questions you might have. And we'll see you next week at this time. Any parting words, Kevin?
No, when you threw down the gauntlet for the integration challenge, all I could think of in my head was all your code is belong to us. But back to the age comment, I'm just aging myself.
Some good programmer humor there. You can Google that one if you don't get it. Okay, well that's all for us today. I really appreciate your time, and check back in and connect with us, and we'll see you next week. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone.